Hello, my name is still Peter Collins, and I welcome you back. If indeed you are coming back, having recovered from the first lecture, or if you're coming to this lecture for the first time, I also welcome you. I should have mentioned last time that accompanying these lectures, there is a course handout which the Academy will circulate to you, which tells you really on one page 4 things. One is, what are the objectives of the course? What are the titles of the 6 lectures? How we're proposing to organize discussions online after the lectures by setting up webinars in which we can discuss questions which you have sent in beforehand. And finally, there is a section on assessments for those of you who wish to be assessed on the work you've done for this course, which is entirely optional. Nobody has to be assessed. But if you want to be assessed, you can choose exactly how you want to be assessed. You might want to be assessed by submitting a paper. You might want a multiple choice test. You might want a traditional exam, or you might want an oral exam over Skype or something. But that is all explained in the course outline, and you should be receiving that once David knows who is and who isn't on the course. Today's lecture is about the philosophy of morality, or more specifically, more technically known as ethics. Ethics is the study of the basis of moral judgments. So this is about teaching morality. Now, in the last lecture, I argued that both philosophers and coaches are doing essentially the same thing, helping people to answer the question, what is the best kind of life that I can live, and what must I do to live such a life? This has actually been recognized as the central questions which need to be answered by the thinkers and healers in all cultures of which we have knowledge: early African and South American culture, Chinese culture, Indian, Middle Eastern, classical and modern European, North American, and Australasian cultures. All cultures need concepts of what it is to live a truly happy and worthwhile life, and what people need to do to be able to do to live such a life. In other words, all cultures need a set of moral beliefs which everyone must be encouraged or required to live by. We therefore need expert teachers of morality, coaches in the very broadest sense, to teach us all the art of living well and what constitutes the right and wrong conduct which will enable us or prevent us from living good lives. We especially need moral experts to teach our children and to teach our rulers. I am henceforth going to take it for granted that the relevance of philosophical questions to best practice in coaching is now self-evident. Contact me if I am wrong. So how do moral questions arise? This is actually a question for evolutionary biology. Human being freedom of choice has evolved from simple avoidance behavior in very primitive animals to wondering how to secure the best or the worst possible life for oneself and others in the short, medium, and indefinitely long term, including whatever future there will be after you and I and they are all dead. We are animals with an exceptionally well-developed capacity for anticipating alternative futures, different futures, both in the short and in the medium and in the long term. And we are also capable of seeking to adapt our behavior now so as to bring about what we take to be the best possible future state of affairs. Rather few of our decisions are of the immediate and simple flee or fight type. Most require many, often complex decisions to get the result we want over various time periods. E.g., we have to make lots of decisions of a complicated kind about how to best to prosecute our careers in the short, medium, and long term, about how to develop our relationships with loved ones, how to bring up our children. Moreover, we're social animals whose well-being depends to a great extent on success in getting others to collaborate with us in bringing about the things we want and in defending ourselves successfully against those who wish to frustrate our getting what we want, e.g. by killing, robbing, enslaving, or cheating us. So the two fundamental moral questions about which human beings, to a vastly greater extent than any other animals, have to make choices are: what states of affairs should I strive to bring about in my life? And how should I treat others while I'm doing this? Now, there really is a problem with answering those questions, and it's the problem of selfishness. Some people think that the answers to these questions about how to live the best possible life and how we must treat others in trying to live such a life is completely obvious. The best way for me to live is obviously, so they think, by pursuing whatever I want from life with whatever talents, tastes, resources, and other opportunities are available to me. And my treatment of other people should be solely determined by the ways in which they can help or hinder me in getting what I want. I should therefore never make substantial sacrifices of my own interests to secure the interests of others. And in any situation in which I find myself, I should ask only, what's in it for me? In other words, I should live a life of thoroughgoing and guilt-free selfishness or egoism. And if we happen to want our children to be happy too, this is what we should teach them. Now, at this point, I'm going to embark upon a digression into how the ancient Greek philosophers developed an early theory of coaching. In particular, how they saw the relationship between morality, happiness, virtue, wisdom, and psychotherapy. Perhaps the most famous book in philosophy of all time is Plato's book called The Republic. At the beginning of that book, which is a dialogue, a conversation between different people, one of whom is always Socrates, he asks the question or raises the question, what actually is morality? What is justice? What is right conduct in our treatment of others? This question is raised by Socrates. And one of his interlocutors, who's called Thrasymachus, says the answer's simple. Morality or justice is the interest of the stronger. Might makes right. Morality, quote, in quotes, is simply the set of rules imposed by stronger people on weaker people. And they impose those rules so that they can amass power and thereby enjoy all the things that power can secure, including all the things that money can buy. One of the other speakers, after Socrates has tried to refute Thrasymachus, says, well, let's ask the question a different way around. Does virtue pay? Does the person who lives a morally admirable life actually have a happier life than the person who lives a thoroughly immoral and totally selfish life? In particular, he compares the life of a perfectly wicked person who is ruthlessly selfish, but manages through cunning to get a reputation for being a person of great goodness and virtue. And he compares the life of a perfectly wicked man with a reputation for being good with that of a perfectly perfectly just or good person. And here he was thinking of the historical Socrates, who, though he lives a perfectly good life, is actually ignored and hated and vilified by society and eventually, as in Socrates' case, put to death. Now, says Glaucon, can you really tell me that the life of the perfectly unjust man, as I have described him, isn't better than the life of the perfectly just man? Well, eventually, after about 400 pages, Socrates tells us what the answer to this question is. Socrates' answer is that the elements of a person's life and personality, reason, emotion, and will, are integrated rather than at war and need to work together harmoniously so that a rational person's life is characterized by balance, integrity, wholeness, health, and holiness. Those words are etymologically linked. It's also characterized by serenity and blessedness, which is still, Socrates' answer, the essence of all moralities based on religion. Now, Plato's pupil, and in some ways even more famous philosopher, Aristotle, had a rather more specific answer. His answer was in terms of the relationship between what is usually translated as happiness, but actually means spiritual well-being or wellness, excellence or virtue, human excellences or strengths or virtues, and what he very interestingly calls psychotherapy. He says that the best kind of life which human beings can live is one where they enjoy spiritual or psychological well-being or happiness, the Greek word for which is eudaimonia, by cultivating and practicing the virtues and forms of human excellence, which are necessary to achieve the forms of human excellence necessary to achieve happiness, as identified and learnt through the love of wisdom, which is philosophy. And the value of philosophy is that it teaches us how to take care of our souls, which is the Greek psychotherapy. Psycho, the soul, therapy, taking care of. So Greek philosophy was all about coaching. You didn't know that. Not many people do. Well, let's answer the question, why not be entirely selfish? There's an easy case, and that's the case where our happiness depends on relationships of love. Freud famously said that mental health consists in the ability to work and to love. Most people, at least those with the rare good fortune to live in the affluent parts of the world in the 21st century, would broadly agree that having good personal relationships with family and friends and interesting, well-paid, well-respected work are the two main ingredients of what makes life worth living for them and what they most want from their lives. The satisfactions of love between romantic partners, between parents and children, between friends, and even with animals, constitute the deepest and almost universally sought sources of human happiness, and their manifold frustrations are amongst the most widespread and intense forms of human suffering. Moreover, it is obvious that it's impossible to enjoy the satisfactions of true intimacy which human loving requires and offers if one's attitude to one's loved ones is wholly selfish. The joy of requited love in any form logically depends on each partner genuinely caring about the well-being of the other, at least as much as, and often more than they care, about their own happiness and interests. Love implies a willingness, a happy willingness, to make some real sacrifices of one's own self-centered preferences in order to increase the happiness of a loved one. For example, a small example, getting up out of a deep sleep in the middle of the night in order to feed a hungry baby is a considerable sacrifice of what you actually want to be doing, but it's something that you gladly do because you love your baby and know that your baby needs to be fed. A more dramatic example is when somebody in a trench during wartime throws themselves on a grenade which is about to explode in order to save their comrades. So unselfishness, sacrificing one's own interests to secure the well-being of others, is a necessary and characteristic part of all loving relationships. Nor does love only require the virtue of unselfishness. The joys of shared intimacy are also only possible to those who are kind to each other, honest with each other, and treat each other with sensitivity, intelligence, respect, and fairness. So it is easy to see why we need to coach people in the difficult art of loving and to encourage them to cultivate within themselves the appropriate moral virtues of unselfishness. So love is the easy case, but the hard case is work. And here we need to go back to the writings of a very famous 16th century Italian called Machiavelli, of whom some of you have probably heard, because you will know the word Machiavellian is almost synonymous with political skullduggery of many sorts. Now, although Machiavelli wrote around the turn of the 16th century, no one has denied that his arguments about morality and work are even more relevant today than they were then, precisely because the greatly increased importance of success at work as a central ingredient in people's sense of their own worth and their general enjoyment of their lives. Machiavelli recognized that for many people, ambition is not important, and they are content exclusively seeking the satisfactions of the private life, in which the case for practicing Christian and other virtues, so Machiavelli thought, might not do any harm and might even do some good. However, he thought that practicing such virtues would be disastrous for people who are ambitious in the world of work and in the public domain. He thought, in fact, that many people, including himself and those he personally most admired, are not driven by a love of the private life. They are driven by the ambition to seek power, glory, fame, and fortune. For the ambitious, what makes life worth living is the pursuit of fame and fortune in competitive activities where there are few winners, as we would say today, few stars and superstars, and many losers. For him, the preeminent competitive activities in which the ambitious could satisfy their desires, their ambitions, were waging war and acquiring and keeping political power. Today, the ambitious seek to compete successfully in business, the professions, the world of entertainment, in sport, and you may be shocked to hear in academia, and so on. Now, here's what Machiavelli says about the means you need to adopt if your end is the gratification of your ambitions through success at work. He notoriously claimed that the ambitious should ignore all constraints on their behavior, which would be imposed by following the prescriptions of morality, whether based on religion or on a religionless humanism. In my view, the case he made for pure and ruthless selfishness in the pursuit of ambition has never been convincingly rebutted, except by me. Machiavelli thought that if you want to advance in a competitive career and achieve and satisfy your ambition, if not achieve, even if you don't achieve superstardom, at least you achieve a reasonable amount of wealth and a measure of social status. If that's what you want, then you must ignore all considerations of morality if they will impede the progress of your career. In particular, you must be prepared when necessary to lie, cheat, break promises, betray friends and allies, terrorize both subordinates and enemies, and resort to spectacular cruelties when necessary. But above all, you must become a genius at practicing hypocrisy, so that despite your ruthless and complete selfishness, you acquire a reputation as a person of exceptional honor and goodness, devoting your whole life to furthering the good of your customers, your clients, your employees, your shareholders, your community, your country, and the whole world. So, although you're actually only pursuing your own personal ambition for wealth, power, and glory, you pretend successfully that you're really only interested in the public good and the well-being of other people. And even it, says Machiavelli, if this is not how the ambitious should behave, even if it isn't, even if you don't agree with me that it's how they should behave, it is, he says, how they actually do behave. And if you look at South African politics and South African business, you might think he has a point. No matter how good people are at managing their public relations so that everyone believes that they are deeply moral people, in fact, they are following Machiavelli's advice and ruthlessly pursuing a selfish agenda dictated by their personal ambition. So the question is, how do we coach people about achieving success in their work without advising them to behave with the complete lack of moral concern which Machiavelli recommends? Well, I think the answer to that is to be found in the concept of vocations. People need to pursue their careers in the context of having, or to pursue happiness in the context of having not just a successful career, but also of fulfilling a worthwhile vocation. This is what true happiness in work consists in, and this is what we shall explore next week. Thank you very much. End of lecture 2.